Son slept with his brother's wife, destroying his own marriage along with his brother's, claiming that true love can never go unnoticed. But within 2 months of his new relationship, she left him for another man and screwed him over for all his money. Now, son demands that we, along with his brother and ex-wife, give him another opportunity to redeem himself. I never imagined that I'd be writing something like this, much less sharing it with the world, but I need to know if I'm wrong about the way I feel. My family has been through more turmoil in the last few months than most people go through in a lifetime. I feel like I've been living in a nightmare watching everything we've built over the years crumble because of one person's reckless actions. It all started with my younger son, Daniel, and the choices he made that shattered our family into pieces. Let me give you some background so that everything makes sense. Our family was close-knit. We had weekly Sunday dinners, celebrated holidays together, and even went on annual family vacations. We believed we were raising 2 fine men. Our eldest, Brian, married his college sweetheart, Emily, about 7 months ago. They were what you'd call the perfect couple, high school sweethearts who grew together, supported each other, and built a life many would envy. They bought a lovely home, started a family, and were living what seemed like a fairy tale life. My wife and I have always tried to instill good values in our children, and Brian took it very seriously. He is a hard worker dedicated to his family and job and has always been the responsible older brother. Then there's Daniel, who has always been the more free-spirited of the two. He's charming, sociable, and has always been able to talk his way out of any situation. While Brian was focused on building a stable career and family, Daniel was more interested in living in the moment. He's bounced from one relationship to another, never really settling down, and he's always had a bit of a wild streak. But despite all this, we never thought he'd do something that would destroy everything. 2 years ago, Daniel met Sharon, a woman who seemed to be his perfect match. Sharon was kind, patient, and understanding, qualities that Daniel often lacked. She was exactly the type of person who could balance out Daniel's impulsive nature, and for a while it seemed like she had. They got married in a small intimate ceremony just over a year ago. Sharon was a lovely person, and we could tell she genuinely cared for Daniel. We were hopeful that marriage would help him settle down and take life more seriously. Unfortunately, that hope was short-lived. It wasn't long before Daniel's restless nature began to resurface. He started spending more time away from home, often claiming he needed space or time to think. We noticed the strain this put on Sharon, but she remained supportive and tried to make their marriage work. We could see that she didn't deserve what was happening, but we had no idea how bad things really were. 2 months ago, our world was turned upside down. And when Brian came to us devastated and heartbroken, he had discovered that his wife, Emily, had been having an affair. Although he didn't know exactly who the other man was, Emily's secret was out. She had become distant, secretive, and unrecognizable from the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. Brian had always trusted her, never questioning her late nights or sudden trips out of town, but something had changed. He had found messages on her phone cryptic but suggestive enough to confirm his worst fears. At the same time, Sharon, who had been growing increasingly frustrated with Daniel's erratic behavior, decided she couldn't take it anymore. Daniel's constant coming and going, his unexplained absences, and his sudden disinterest in their marriage were all red flags that she could no longer ignore. One night after another of his unannounced disappearances, Sharon confronted him directly. She asked him if there was someone else. Daniel, caught off guard, tried to lie at first, claiming that he was just under a lot of stress from work and needed space, but Sharon was relentless, and eventually, after a tense and tear-filled argument, Daniel confessed. He admitted to Sharon that he had been seeing someone else for months. When she pressed him for details, the truth finally came out. He had been having an affair with Emily, Brian's wife. The revelation was like a bomb going off in our family. Sharon was devastated, not only because of the betrayal, but because of who it was with. She felt humiliated, deceived, and completely broken. It didn't take long for us to piece everything together. Brian's suspicions, Sharon's confrontation with Daniel, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Emily and Daniel had betrayed their spouses and were having an affair. But what shocked us even more was their complete lack of remorse. When confronted, both Emily and Daniel didn't seem to grasp the gravity of what they had done. Instead of apologizing or showing any signs of guilt, they tried to justify their actions. Daniel claimed that him and Emily had developed a connection that was too strong to ignore, that their relationship was something special, something meant to be. He went on about how true love can never go unnoticed, as if that somehow excused the deceit and pain they had caused. Emily, on the other hand, insisted that her marriage with Brian had been falling apart long before the affair began, and that Daniel simply understood her in a way Brian never could. It was as if they both believed that their actions were somehow justified because of their so-called connection. Did they really think that was okay? Did they genuinely believe that their love gave them the right to destroy not just one but 2 marriages? It was incomprehensible to us, Their lack of guilt and their inability to see the wrong in what they had done was infuriating. They seemed more concerned with being together than with the damage they had caused. It was as if the rest of us, their spouses, their families, were just collateral damage in their pursuit of happiness. This wasn't just a betrayal of brotherhood, it was a betrayal of marriage. Daniel didn't just destroy his brother's life, he destroyed his own marriage to Sharon. The news hit Sharon like a ton of bricks. She was blindsided by the revelation that she had no idea that Daniel had been unfaithful to her. Sharon was shattered, and she didn't deserve any of this. She had believed in Daniel, supported him through thick and thin, and this was how he repaid her. Brian too was crushed. His world came crashing down around him as the realization set in that not only had his wife betrayed him but his own brother, the person he had trusted more than anyone, had been the one to stab him in the back. Brian immediately ended his marriage with Emily and cut all ties with Daniel. My wife and I were horrified. We couldn't believe that Daniel would betray his own brother like this, and we didn't know what to do. Our family was broken. Brian moved out of his home leaving Emily behind, and we haven't seen much of him since. He's been trying to heal, but it's been tough. Meanwhile, Daniel moved in with Emily and they started a relationship openly. As parents, my wife and I were torn. We couldn't believe what Daniel had done, yet we also felt an overwhelming sense of failure. Where had we gone wrong? How had our son turned into someone who could do this to his own brother? To his own wife? It was a question we asked ourselves over and over, but no answer ever seemed sufficient. We were heartbroken, not just for Brian and Sharon, but for the loss of the family we once were. The fallout was immediate. Brian moved out of the house he shared with Emily, taking the kids and leaving everything else behind. He wanted nothing to do with her or the life they had built together. Sharon too packed up and left Daniel, returning to her parents' house to try to make sense of what had happened. Both of them were left shattered, trying to pick up the pieces of their lives while Daniel and Emily continued their affair without a hint of shame. As weeks went by, the situation only became more strained. Brian distanced himself from the family, not wanting to be around Daniel or hear anything about him. Sharon cut off all communication with Daniel, refusing to even acknowledge his attempts to contact her. My wife and I found ourselves in an impossible position, caught between our love for our sons and our anger at what Daniel had done. We tried to reach out to Brian to be there for him, but he was understandably guarded, keeping us at arm's length. For a while, Daniel and Emily flaunted their new relationship on social media, posting about their true love and how happy they were. As if cheating on his wife and destroying his brother's marriage wasn't enough, now he felt the need to show it off to the world. Daniel and Emily seemed to believe that everything would eventually blow over and the people would accept their relationship and move on, but that wasn't going to happen. The damage was too deep. The betrayal, too painful. Every time we tried to talk to Daniel about what he had done, he would brush it off, insisting that he was in love and that was all that mattered. He couldn't or wouldn't see the hurt he had caused to Brian and Sharon. Then 2 months into their new relationship, the tables turned on Daniel. Emily left him for another man who, according to her, was her true love. She took him for everything he had, his savings, his belongings, everything. Daniel was left with nothing. It was like karma came back to bite him and he was devastated. The woman he had risked everything for, the woman he had betrayed his own brother and wife for, had abandoned him and taken everything he had. She drained his bank account, took his belongings, and left him with nothing. Daniel came crawling back to us devastated and penniless, claiming that he had been used and manipulated. But it wasn't just us he was asking for forgiveness from. He wanted Brian to forgive him and give him another chance to be a brother again. He wanted Brian, us, and even Sharon, his ex-wife, to somehow understand that he had been manipulated and that he was the victim in all of this. He wanted everyone to just forget what had happened and go back to how things were before. But how could we? My wife and I were torn. On one hand, he is our son and we love him. But on the other hand, his actions have caused so much pain and destruction. Brian is still healing, and the last thing he needs is Daniel coming back into his life asking for forgiveness when he hasn't even begun to make amends. Sharon is also trying to move on with her life after being devastated by Daniel's betrayal, and dragging her back into this mess seems cruel. Daniel doesn't seem to understand the gravity of what he's done. He keeps saying that he's learned his lesson and he deserves a chance to prove himself, but I'm not sure if he really understands the damage he's caused. My wife thinks we should try to help him, that we should support him in his time of need, but I'm struggling to see how we can do that without betraying Brian and Sharon all over again. I don't know how to navigate this situation, and I don't know if I'm wrong for feeling like Daniel doesn't deserve another chance after what he's done. So, Reddit, AITA for not wanting to give my son another chance to redeem himself after he destroyed his own marriage and his brother's marriage and caused so much pain in our family, or should I be more understanding and try to help him through this mess he's made? Update 1. It's been 3 days since I posted, and the responses have been overwhelming. I appreciate all the advice and support from everyone who took time to comment. After reading through the comments and taking some time to think, I decided to have a conversation with Brian to see how he felt about the whole situation. I needed to know where he stood before making any decisions about Daniel. Brian was very clear. He wanted nothing to do with Daniel. He didn't mince his words, and I could see the pain in his eyes as he spoke. He told me that while he's trying to move on with his life, the pain of the betrayal is still very fresh. Every day is a struggle for him, waking up and going through the motions of life with a gaping hole where his trust and happiness used to be. He said that it wasn't just the affair that broke him. It was the fact that it was his own brother who had shattered his world. Brian had always looked out for Daniel, being the older brother who was there for him through thick and thin. To have that bond torn apart by someone he loved and trusted so deeply was something he couldn't just brush off or forgive. He's been seeing a therapist to help him work through everything, and he's trying to rebuild his life, but having Daniel back in the picture is the last thing he needs. Brian explained that every time he sees Daniel, he's reminded of what was taken from him. The images of Daniel and Emily together laughing and carrying on behind his back haunt him constantly. He's been trying to find peace, focusing on his own healing. But Daniel's presence is like a wound that won't heal. Brian also shared something that broke my heart even further. I could see he was crippled under the weight of all the memories and responsibilities of being a father. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks, and I could tell that the constant reminders of what had happened were taking a toll on him. Seeing him in that state made me feel helpless as a parent. I wanted to do something to ease his burden, to help him find some peace amidst all the chaos. I told him that if he was okay with it, I could take the grandkids with me for a while just so he could have some time to relax and clear his mind. I thought maybe some space would help him focus on himself and give him the break he desperately needed. But Brian shook his head and said that his kids were his anchor. He told me that if they weren't around, his brain wouldn't work, that they were the only thing keeping him grounded in reality. He said that their laughter, their routines, and even the small demands of their daily lives were what kept him from spiraling into a dark place. The thought of being without them even for a short time was unbearable to him. Hearing this only deepened my concern. Brian was holding on to his kids as his lifeline, but I worried that the weight of everything else might still pull him under. Yet I understood his reasoning. His children were his source of strength, the one thing that kept him going every day despite the overwhelming pain he was carrying. It was clear that for Brian, his role as a father was more than just a responsibility. It was his way of coping, of finding purpose amid his heartache. He also mentioned that Emily has reached out to him trying to make amends, but he's not interested in rekindling any kind of relationship with her either. She sent him several messages, first apologizing and then trying to justify her actions by claiming that she and Daniel were meant to be and that their connection was something special. So this means that it didn't work out with the guy she left Daniel for either. Ironic, isn't it? Another true love of hers turns out to be a facade. Brian said it was like she was trying to manipulate him all over again to get him to see things from her twisted perspective, but he's done with her lies and manipulation. He's focusing on himself and his own healing, and that's all he can handle right now. He's made it clear to her that they have nothing left to discuss, and he's blocked her on all platforms to prevent her from contacting him again. Hearing this from Brian made it clear to me that bringing Daniel back into his life would only cause more harm than good. It reinforced my feelings that Daniel needs to face the consequences of his actions without expecting everyone to just forgive and forget. Brian told me that he's found some solace in his therapy sessions where he's learning to set boundaries and prioritize his own well-being. He started to engage in new hobbies like hiking. And painting to keep his mind occupied and to find a new sense of purpose. He's even thinking about relocating to a different city to start fresh away from all the painful memories. The last thing he needs is Daniel showing up and reopening old wounds. After my conversation with Brian, I was even more torn. As a father, my instinct is to protect and support my children, but I couldn't ignore the immense pain that Daniel had caused. I needed to talk to my wife to figure out how we were going to handle this situation. She's been more sympathetic to Daniel mainly because he's our son, and she wants to see him happy and stable. She's been struggling with the idea of turning our backs on him even though she knows that what he did was unforgivable. When I told her about my conversation with Brian, she was visibly shaken. She hadn't realized just how deeply Brian was hurting. I think she had hoped that time would heal all wounds and that the family could somehow come back together. But after hearing what Brian had to say, even she's starting to see that maybe it's not the right time to try to bring the family back together. She was heartbroken, admitting that she felt like she was losing both her sons, one to anger and resentment and the other to his own poor decisions. We both agreed that Daniel needs to take responsibility for what he's done, and that means not relying on us to fix everything for him. My wife has decided to step back from trying to mediate between the two brothers. She realized that her attempts to smooth things over might be doing more harm than good. We've both agreed that Daniel needs to figure this out on his own. that he needs to understand the gravity of his actions and the impact they've had on everyone around him. We've told him that while we love him, we can't make things right for him. He needs to face the consequences of his actions and start making amends on his own terms. As difficult as this situation has been, the insights from the comments on my original post have been invaluable. They've helped us see things from different perspectives and given us the strength to make some tough decisions. We're still navigating this painful journey, but we're committed to doing what's best for everyone involved, even if that means making some hard choices. Thank you to everyone who shared their thoughts and advice. It's made a world of difference in helping us figure out the best way forward. Update 2. Hi, guys. I know many of you were asking for an update, so here it is. A day or two after I talked with Brian, Daniel appeared on our door again, but this time he wasn't just looking for forgiveness. He was looking for a place to stay. He looked disheveled and worn out, a shadow of the confident man he once was. When he stepped into the house, I could tell something was seriously wrong. After a moment of hesitation, he finally admitted that Emily had robbed him of all his money. She had drained his accounts and disappeared with another man, leaving him broke and unable to pay his rent. Now with nowhere else to go, he was at our doorstep hoping we would take him in. To be honest, I didn't want him in my house. After everything he'd done, after the pain and chaos he caused, the last thing I wanted was to welcome him back into our home. But my wife, being the kind-hearted person she is, insisted that we couldn't turn our backs on him, especially not when he was in such a dire situation. I knew she didn't support his actions either, but seeing her son in that condition brought out the motherly side of her. It was hard for her to see Daniel, her once bright and ambitious child, reduced to this state. After some back and forth, I reluctantly agreed to let him stay, but only under certain conditions. We let him in with the stipulation that he would put all of his efforts into apologizing to Brian and to Sharon, his ex-wife, especially Sharon, because from what we knew through her family, she wasn't doing the best either. The betrayal had hit her hard, and she was struggling to pick up the pieces of her life. Sharon had always been a gentle, caring person, and she certainly didn't deserve the heartbreak that Daniel had inflicted on her. My wife and I made it clear to Daniel that his stay with us would only be temporary and contingent upon his willingness to make genuine amends for the pain he had caused. Daniel nodded and assured us that he would do as we asked. He promised that he would reach out to both Brian and Sharon, apologize sincerely, and begin the long road to making things right. For a moment, I thought there might be hope that he was ready to take responsibility for his actions, but that hope was short-lived. Over the next 2 days, it became clear that Daniel hadn't changed at all. Instead of taking steps to make amends, he reverted to his old careless ways. He spent his time lounging on our couch watching TV and scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. He showed no signs of remorse or urgency, no indication that he understood the gravity of his situation. It was as if the reality of his circumstances hadn't sunk in. He wasn't devastated by the fact that Emily, his so-called love of his life, had betrayed him and left him penniless. Instead, he seemed almost indifferent, as though he was simply waiting for the next opportunity to come along. My wife and I watched in growing frustration as Daniel wasted the little time we had given him. He made no effort to contact Brian or Sharon, no attempt to fix the mess he had created. It was becoming painfully obvious that we had made a mistake in letting him stay with us. Daniel wasn't interested in making amends. He was simply looking for a place to crash while he figured out his next move. I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted Daniel and told him that we had expected more from him. We had taken him in with the understanding that he would take responsibility for his actions, but instead, he was treating our home like a free hotel. My wife, who had initially been more sympathetic, was also losing her patience. She told Daniel that it was clear he wasn't ready to face the consequences of his actions and that he didn't deserve to stay with us if he wasn't going to take this situation seriously. Without wasting any more time, we told him that he needed to pack his bags and leave within the hour. We made it clear that he wasn't welcome back until he made genuine efforts to apologize to Brian and Sharon and until we received word from them that he was actively trying to make things right. Daniel looked stunned, as if he hadn't expected us to take such a firm stance, but we had reached our limit. We couldn't enable his irresponsible behavior any longer. After Daniel left, it didn't take long for him to stop bombarding us with apologies. Within hours of walking out the door, he was calling, texting, and leaving voicemails, all filled with the same desperate refrain. Hundreds of sorries tumbling out one after another. He pleaded for another chance, insisted that he was ready to change, that he understood the gravity of his mistakes now, but we knew better. This wasn't the first time Daniel had made promises he couldn't keep. We have been through this cycle before, him messing up, apologizing, and then falling back into his old habits as soon as the pressure eased. We told him that we weren't the ones who needed to hear his apologies. His words meant nothing if they weren't directed at the people he had truly wronged, Brian and Sharon. We were done endorsing his free-spirited behavior and done enabling him to drift through life without facing the consequences of his actions. It was time for him to grow up, take responsibility, and realize that his choices had real lasting impacts on the people around him. In the meantime, my wife and I have focused on supporting Brian and Sharon in any way we can. They're the ones who truly deserve our attention and care right now, and we're doing everything we can to help them heal from the wounds Daniel and Emily inflicted. It hasn't been easy, but we're taking it one day at a time, hoping that eventually we'll all be able to move forward and find some semblance of peace. Update 3. Hi, everyone. A lot has happened over the past few days, and I wanted to update you all on where things stand. First and foremost, my wife and I decided it was time to step in and give Brian some much-needed support. We could see that he was struggling under the weight of his responsibilities, especially with the kids, so we went to his place and insisted that we take the kids with us for a week or two. Brian, being the dedicated father he is, was reluctant at first. He didn't want to be separated from them, not even for a short while, but we knew that he needed a break, a chance to catch his breath and sort through his feelings without the constant demands of parenting. Hiding behind his responsibilities might provide temporary relief, but it wasn't a long-term solution. He needed time to heal, to really get a grasp on everything that had happened, and we hoped that taking the kids off his hands for a little while might help.